Hello and welcome to UCTV Alive for Kids. I'm your host, Dr Louise Grimmer from the University of Tasmania. UCTV Alive for Kids is an interactive online show that is broadcast monthly by Zoom webinar. As a reflection of our institution's recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, the University of Tasmania wishes to acknowledge the traditional owners of Lutruwita, Tasmania, the Palawa people, the original custodians of the land from which I'm broadcasting to you today. We pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Well, happy Science Week, everyone. And we're so pleased to have so many of you attending today's Science Week episode. A huge hello to all of the schools around Tasmania and Australia and our homeschool families. Your microphone and camera have all been disabled to protect your privacy, and this broadcast is being recorded for later access on the Peter Underwood Centre website and YouTube, details of which we will share during the Q&A break, along with details of how you can subscribe to future episodes. Well, today's episode is all about glass, and we have a very special guest, Billy Crellin, coming on the show. Billy is a glassmaker. He's based in Melbourne and he's been blowing glass for 12 years, and he runs his own company called Studio Decola. Billy studied at Sydney College of the Arts and he also trained at the Jam Factory in Adelaide. Billy makes glass products for the home, so things like cups and reusable glass straws, light shades and bottles. But he also makes art from glass, things like balloon dogs and abstract sculptures. Now, Billy went to primary school at St Joseph's in Taree in New South Wales, and we'd like to give a special shout out to the students and staff, because we understand that the entire school, hello Billy, the entire school
Hi.
has tuned into today's episode, as well as Billy's mum who works at the school. So hi, Billy's mum. Billy, you might want to give a shout out to St Joseph's.
Hi, St. Joseph's. Hello, Mum.
Hi, Billy's mum. Well, Billy, thank you so much for coming on to the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we watch a video that features you doing this wonderful glass blowing, I just had a quick question for you. What does Decola mean, the name of your company? What does the word mean?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Louise. It's a pleasure to be here. Decola is the name for my commercial tableware company. The word means around and around, and that signifies the action we do whilst blowing glass, turning the pipe constantly to keep it balanced. It also is representative of trends and cyclic values in recycling and the circular economy.
So it's a really, really good name, because as we're going to see in just a moment, turning things is a really important part of glass blowing, isn't it?
Indeed.
Shall we watch your video?
Yeah, sure. It's all a fight against gravity.
That's it, as you'll all see. All right, let's watch Billy making glass.
Hi, my name's Billy Crellen. I'm a Melbourne-based glass practitioner. I really enjoy being a glass blower simply because of the creative process behind the material. I like seeing an object grow from its conception as a drawing through to a stage of tooling production, and then the realization of the vessel blown in glass, and finally its functional finished use, the end user, and how the product sits in its environment. As a glass blower, we work with the molten form of the material, which everyone is familiar with. That the process involves using specialized tools. Our main tool would be a 6-foot metal blowpipe, and we use that to gather the material mass from another specialized instrument called a furnace, which holds the glass at 1200 degrees Celsius whilst we're working. From that point forward, after we gather the material, it's a process of constantly reheating and tooling in order to achieve the shape that we desire. Yeah, so whilst we're working with the glass, it's constantly subjected to forces of gravity and centrifugal force. So if we stop turning entirely, it's likely to fall on the ground in a puddle. But on the other hand, if we turn too fast, the centrifugal force will splay the shape open. The glass that I gather from the furnace is in fact clear. We work with colour in very much a similar way that a painter would order paints from a studio that produces them or a factory. So we order the raw colour in, and that is then combined with the clear glass that we hold in our furnace. The way it operates is very much down to the optic properties of the glass. It is only a thin layer of the colour, a veneer on the inside or the outside, and that gives the illusion that the whole piece is in fact coloured. So a nice pink glass is in fact a combination of the raw colour we've purchased from the supplier, and it's added to our clear glass in the furnace. But once inflated and blown up, it gives the impression that the entire vessel is pink, in fact. A question often asked is how long objects take to make, and that can really range depending on the arrangement of the colour, but typically we look to make a cup in around 15 to 20 minutes, which is drastically different to what you might find machines making them at. But there is a slowness to the handmade process, and then that's able to unveil the intricacies of handmade techniques as well, as like colours and patterns. I guess the path to becoming a glassmaker is very much like an apprenticeship. It is a trade, and it takes, I guess, many years of applying a certain set of techniques and skills. I was introduced to glass in the university environment, and that's very typical for a lot of other glass blowers in Australia. So you can see a lot of glass blowing online. There's a great swathe of resources on YouTube, and most likely Instagram and other social medias. You can also easily access it. Yeah, it's a great phenomenon to see. Yeah, I hope that my explanation will help whilst you're watching the video.
That was such an amazing video, Billy. I could watch that for hours. It was quite meditative watching you turn those rods. You can see why that circular name of your company is just so, apt, I guess. I'm sure all of you have got lots of questions that you'd like to ask Billy about glass blowing. So what we'll do now is we'll take a 5-minute break, and there'll be a countdown on your screen. And if you can think of those questions and pop them into the Q&A function that you can see on your screen. And you can ask questions anonymously, but if you'd like to include your first name and your school name, we'll try and give you a shout out as well. So let's switch over to our 5-minute break screen, and we'll see you soon. Well, hello, everybody. 5 minutes goes very quickly, doesn't it? Welcome back. Thank you so much for posting up your questions. I think, Billy, we've got the largest number of questions posted that I've ever seen in all of the episodes that I have hosted. So look, everybody, if we don't get a chance to ask your question, I do sincerely apologise, but we have over 180 questions up here on the chat and they just keep coming in. Billy, what we
10
might
minutes
do
enough.
is you and I might be able to do a little recording of some of the questions when we finish today, and maybe we can post that up on the site for everybody to watch,
That sounds
because
great.
I don't think we're going to get through 180 questions.
Perhaps
So
not.
what I'll do is I'll stop talking and let's ask some questions. Okay, we have a first question here from Alessandra, and she asks, have you been burned while you've been blowing glass?
Thanks, Alexandra. That's a good question. Yes, it does happen from time to time, but as we develop in our skills over the years from our beginning stages, we tend to learn those instances where we might get burnt and try and avoid that.
I must admit that was my first sort of safety concern when I watched your video, because it's so hot, isn't it? You gave the temperature of the glass that's coming out of the furnace, and it's quite dangerous work. Here's another question for you. How do you make glass straws?
Yeah, so glass straws, it relies on a technique that actually is very old and very common. Some people actually in European countries have a last name that means tube puller or something, and that might resemble that they worked in a factory once upon a time where they made glass tubes, and that's essentially the process that we use. We pull a long tube of glass, and that's chopped into sections, and that way I can make a straw from that tube.
Here's a great question from Teddy at Margate Primary School. How do you make the inside of the glass empty?
Yeah, good question. So when we first gather the mass of glass from the furnace, it's in fact solid. And we introduce air to that initially by blowing across the open end of our pipe, and we close our thumb across that, which catches that tiny bit of air. And as the air heats up from the hot molten glass, that causes the reaction that it would actually expands. So I guess that's a little complicated, but we just simply use the breath from our lungs and we blow into the material, and that inflates it.
Here's a question from Autumn from Bowen Road Primary School. How long does it take for glass to cool down? That's a good question.
Yeah, thanks, Autumn. That's a tricky one. So everything that we make must undergo a process that's called annealing. And that means that when it comes from our working temperature, which I already described is about 11 or 1200 degrees, down to a temperature of about 500 or 600, we're finished working with it by that point, and we need to put it in another technical instrument called a kiln, which is kind of like a big oven, and that will slowly over about 24 hours temper the glass, and that means that it simply takes the stress out of that process of it going from a liquid material to a solid material. There's a few complicated things happening there, like crystallization in the glass, but it is a really stressed material glass, and that process of annealing actually cools it down so that we can use it on our tables.
Here's a sort of related question from St. Joseph's in Queenstown. Can glass explode while you're making it?
Yeah, once again, like burns, we become over time familiar with instances where glass might be stressed and want to explode. So whenever we're introducing it to water or really cold air, that transition going from really hot to really cold too quickly makes the glass want to explode. So there are times when it will do that, but luckily we all wear safety glasses, and that's going to protect us if it happens.
It's a very dangerous occupation. Here's a question from Fahin from Dominic College. When you spin the glass, are you afraid that it will fall off?
Well, yeah, as I described earlier, you can turn too fast and then it turns into a big spinning flying saucer, but also turning too slow, it will tend to take on the effects of gravity and fall towards the floor. So very much the early stages of learning with the material is learning how to balance that speed of turning and encouraging the glass to stay in the shape that you want it.
Here's a question from Ridgely Primary School. They've got a few questions, but I'll just pick this one. How big can the glass get when you're making it? There was a part of that video where you had a very big piece of glass. Tell us what that was and also how big can things get?
Yeah, so that was a tube I was blowing that was destined to become a light fixture. That was about 600 millimeters in height by about 250 in width. That's quite on the upper scale of what I'm able to achieve at the moment. And typically in older days, you would have seen people using that sort of shape and that scale to make a window glass, actually. So that's an old occupation of the glass blowing process, making glass that would have gone into windows.
What's the worst? This is from Maxim at South Hobart Primary School. What's the worst injury you've had?
Oh, I think, yeah, we take measures to avoid injuries. Obviously, like being careful with the heat. There is radiant heat, which is quite difficult to manage and always constant, especially the bigger you work the pieces. But we work with a team of people that will, in those situations, help shield us from the heat, come between our body parts and the hot molten glass with something like a wooden paddle, which is protective. Also, things like we're carrying very heavy weights that are extended from our body. So that might put strain on parts of our body like the lower back, but with certain management and PPE, we can just do that safely.
It's actually quite a physical job, isn't it? I didn't really realize until I saw that video of all the different things that you were doing.
It's somewhere almost like between a sport and an art form.
I know. I was watching it and I was thinking, do you train? Do you work out to be able to hold these they're heavy, aren't they?
It definitely helps, yeah.
Yeah.
Keeping in physical form. Yeah.
Very physical. Here's a question from St Bernard's in Barowra. How do you make patterns in glass?
Yeah, so one of the ways we might achieve pattern is by using color. Similar to the technique I was describing with the straws, we can pull long strings or tubes of color, and they can be laid on the glass in patterns. They apply to old mathematical principles like Fibonacci sequence and things like that. But yeah, that can be one way. Another is to use the optics of the glass. So we have a tool called an optic mold, whereby we press the gather or the gob of the glass we have on our pipe into that. And that creates fluctuations in the surface. And that will interact with the light in a way that reveals pattern as well.
Here's a question from Hallie. And the question is, what is the hardest thing you have made with glass? What was the most difficult thing?
Yeah, so there's two avenues of glass making which I think are the most challenging in the handmade world of glass. Possibly like really fancy decorative wine goblets that you might see from 17th century Italy, things like this. Or the other end is sculpture, so realistic sculpture. It's a very fickle medium to make it do what you want. So yeah, like sculpting busts or like animals and things like that to make it look maybe not like how my year 7 ceramic sculptures looked, but realistic. It's a very tricky thing to do.
We've got a lot of questions that are very similar. So if I'm not reading out your name, hopefully I'm still answering many questions. A lot of them are coming in very similar. So here's a nice one from Billy at Margate Primary. How long have you, Billy Crellen, been passionate about glass blowing? How did you, and it's sort of, there are other questions as well. How did you really become interested in it?
Yeah, thanks, Billy. So as I said, I started at university, and that's a common pathway for Australian glassblowers to have taken.
What course were you doing, Billy? Was it a design course?
No, it was a Bachelor of Visual Arts, but these
Oh,
days you might access it, and previously too, through industrial design or similar pathways. But I think what really inspired me with the material was I was working in 2D mediums in photography, but that changed to a 3D medium, and seeing something tangible and really hands-on with the material characteristics. That was quite satisfying. I saw a lot of similarities. I love the water, and I love going in the ocean as often as I can. And I saw a lot of similarities to the visual aspects of glass and the optic properties, the way it bends light, as I might see when I'm in the ocean, in the water.
I've got a question here from Edith Creek Primary School, grade 3 and 4, and a big shout out to them because they sent their questions in prior to today's episode. They've got a teacher who's very organised.
I saw that.
And
Thank you.
here's a great question from Amelia. Do you need a specific type of sand to make glass?
That's a good question, Amelia. Yeah, so sand makes up roughly about 70% of what we put in our furnace to melt into glass. A good sand for making most types of glass will be low in iron content, and that is just because iron will create a colored glass, and we want to create as clear as possible glass. So rather than the green color that iron adds to glass, we want to get low iron sand to get clear glass, and we'll add the colors in later.
I'm going through these questions very quickly, just keeping an eye on the time. What happens,
Sure.
Billy, when you make a mistake with the glass?
Mistakes can be undone. We can melt out details by applying more heat, and basically the material congeals back on itself into the amorphous gob of material that we started with. But I guess that's what we're trained to try and avoid. Generally, it's a very energy consuming practice, and it takes a long time to make pieces. So if we run into mistakes, we persevere with a piece and try to rectify them, I guess.
That's great. Good to know. And here's a question from Star, who's a homeschooler. Do you know approximately how many glass blowers are in Australia? Now, she says, is it a dying trade? But I'm going to say, is it still a thriving trade? What's the future for glass blowing?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a tricky one because I would say the global community for glass blowers is small in the handmade world. The glass is divided into sort of two histories. One is the industrial heritage that still survives today to manufacture our window glass, and often like a lot of the tableware and things we use. But what the movement of glass making I kind of operate in is called studio glass, and that's been operating under that guise since about the 80s, and I would say it's stronger than ever, but it really is ever growing. Like I'm constantly meeting people that I didn't know in Australia that are glass makers, and yeah, it's a great part of the craft that you are in network with these other makers, and they might know some particular type of knowledge that they're specializing on and be able to share that with you.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I've just got a message here from the Smarts homeschool family with a smiley face. Thank you for showing us how glass blowing works. It was very interesting from the Smarts homeschool family. Well, thank you for that message. That's lovely.
Yeah.
And Deloraine Primary School have got a whole lot of questions here. Some of them I've already asked. One of them that I thought I might just ask here is, this is interesting. What happens if something else gets stuck in the glass while it's hot? What if a bug or something flies it? Is that an occupational hazard, or dust, or I don't know, something else?
Well, it's so hot actually that any organic matter might
just
will
go.
burn before it reaches it. So, but yes, bugs are attracted to light. So haven't experienced that particular scenario before, but anything could happen, I guess.
We've had a lot of questions asking you about, the color of the glass when it comes out of the furnace. And you and I were talking about this before the show started. It's orange. Do you want to explain to everybody why it's orange? That's not necessarily the color it ends up being, is it? And you've got a rod there, haven't you?
That's correct.
A
Yeah.
color rod.
So color's a tricky one to explain in glass blowing, but a lot of people will mistake the clear glass that we're gathering from the furnace to in fact be orange, and that's perfectly fine because it looks orange, and that's simply due to its ambient glow because it's 1100 degrees. So colors can do all sorts of wild and wacky things. Like as I said, we order our colors from manufacturers like painters do. This is an opaque kind of lilac color. But at times we might get a bar that looks clear. And in fact, as we submit it to heat, it can change into colors like this. So that's an effect called striking. It's a technical term. But that's just one way, I guess, I'm trying to explain how color does strange things under heat. A good way to think of it is like the color has certain operating principles, like a black car might heat up faster than a white one.
Yep. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's, I guess, simple physics of color.
Yeah. I'm really sad to look at the time and realize that we've gone 2 minutes over and we've got so many questions. I'm really sorry if we didn't get to answer your question, but as Billy said, there are a lot of resources on YouTube. You can watch glass blowing videos and probably find out answers to your questions if we didn't get to them today.
Yeah.
That's all we've got time for today, everyone. So look, Billy, a huge thank you to you for not only coming on today's show and answering these questions, but for that fantastic video. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Louise, and thanks everyone for tuning in. It's been great.
They have been great. So many great questions. And also, look, I'd like to say thank you to our producer and director, who is called Tess Crellin, and she happens to be Billy's sister, and she makes everything, all the magic work behind the scenes. So a huge thank you to you, Tess, as well. Our next episode of UCTV Alive for Kids is going to be on Monday, the 19th of September at 2:00 again and run till 2:30. If you missed the details during our Q&A break about how to register, you can follow the Peter Underwood Centre on Facebook, or you can follow UCTV Alive for Kids on Instagram. Well, from all of us here at UCTV Alive for Kids at the University of Tasmania, thank you very much, everyone, for taking part in this special Science Week event, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.